So we are going to get started with our final wrap-up, and we envision this time as just a time for questions, reflections on the conference and the weekend. And what we want to do to open up is we have an opportunity now, after having heard from the presenters or any of the other presentations, number one, are there outstanding questions? Meaning exceptional. No. Any lingering questions, any questions you'd like to ask from any of the presenters? Because the idea is that this is just kind of an ongoing conversation. And number two, and we ask this of the panel as well as everyone, any reflections on the presentations? Any take-home points? Anything that has been said that has struck you that you would like to share? And this is open to the panel. Anything you actually thought about since you've spoken that, there's one more thing. So, any questions from any monastics to begin with? Yes. Father Chrysolos, may I ask that you come to the front of the room? Yeah. Or you're going to really need to raise your voice from the back. Thank you, Father.
I simply wanted to say that not anything that has been said has impressed me. Everything has.
And thank you for being with us also, Father. Questions or thoughts additional? Please, Father.
I'm just really excited how this conference on resiliency turned out. For me, resiliency is a bad word in the Army because resiliency for the Army means I can deploy you 1,000 times and you won't get hurt, and I can keep getting a lot of work out of you. So when I heard this conference beyond resiliency, I thought, wow, how is an Orthodox community of pastors and psychotherapists and doctors and nurses and dentists and all these other kinds of people, chaplains, how is this going to go? And I was a little bit nervous. Now, having been here 3 times prior, I thought, this fear, this little scare is probably not warranted. But there was still the sense of how in the world is this going to go? How are we going to talk about resiliency? Because I have this visceral negative response to the very concept. And I will have to say that this couple of days has completely revised my idea of the Word and all the different ways in which it can be powerfully discussed. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you and for other presenters and people I've had a chance to hear from for that, because I just had no idea how this was going to go, and I have a lot of thinking to do, a lot of assimilating to do. This stuff's got to percolate and ferment and et cetera, and the work will continue. But I'm just really thrilled at how we have been able as a community to talk about resilience, because I was skeptical, and that skepticism has been evaporated, and I just wanted to say thank you.
I also want to say thank you, and I think that I wasn't sure how I was going to feel, but like Dee, I grew up not really feeling comfortable in my orthodoxy as a woman, and yet it was always there, and it never wanted to leave. Even though I studied other faith traditions, and I went to an interfaith seminary. And all that did was to affirm or to help me understand my orthodoxy, to help me understand myself as an Orthodox woman and a therapist. But the interesting thing is that I've learned how to be, and I was reminded of the many people in my life as a therapist who helped me see myself as an Orthodox therapist, and those were my not Orthodox clients. one in particular who was an Orthodox Jewish man who was very resistant to my working with him, but we worked together for a year and a half. And at the end of his life, he called me the Rebbitzin. And the Rebbitzin, I said, so tell me, why are you calling me the Rebbitzin? And he said, you're the rabbi's partner. And then he died. And so when he said that, I understood that I was on the right path. And it came from someone from another faith tradition. So I just want to encourage everyone. Like my priest was afraid that I might wander off if I was too involved in other traditions. And I just want to encourage those. That's not going to happen. And it will only enrich your life. And the other traditions are strong and beautiful, and so is ours. That's all. Thank you so much.
All who wander are not lost.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you all for all of your presentations. It's been fantastic being here. I have a quick question about just some of the basics of psychology. When in theology in the church, if people have a deep theological question or a question about how theology relates to their personal lives, they'll go to a priest and have a conversation. But we also have Sunday school where we try to teach the basics. We try to give people a basic foundation of what we believe. Is there a place for that in terms of the psychology side of things? Is there a place for like a curriculum for some of the foundations of just having a healthy mind that we could kind of percolate out there? Do you think there's room for that?
In the church now?
Yeah.
In the church or anywhere?
I think it would benefit all of society, but just in the context of us as Orthodox Christians, this being sort of a blending of orthodoxy and psychology, is there a place sort of within the Orthodox community for us to at least start that?
Academically, I think there's a Master's of Pastoral Counseling at Antiochian Village, and I think the OCA has something too, don't they? Anyway, I don't think there's anything institutionally organized along the lines of what you're saying, but I know there's plenty of people that would be willing to mentor along those lines, and it's a good idea.
May I just say
Do it.
I actually have a little comment about that because I've had some experience. You know, I'm a doctor, so we would never go to counseling, for goodness sakes, but I actually did. And it all started, which was interestingly enough, with the clergy couples retreats that we organized in the West Coast.
Yeah.
And what's actually happened from that, and the people that did attend as a clergy couple, which was actually very difficult for some of the clergy actually to do. The wives seemed to love going, but then when we all went, we had a wonderful time, and it opened up a lot of things, and it started to model what I think for a lot of the clergy was to model for the community that that's another option in the armamentarium of wellness, and I thought that was a very good thing. So I think that's one of the areas. I think things like this are a good thing, and I think maybe Dr. Popa could talk about it a little bit.
She has something to say.
What I wanted to share is that yes, indeed, there are master programs, but there are also programs that, although they're not within the Orthodox Church, they can overlap really beautifully. For example, Internal Family System, their program, you don't have to have a master for it, but you can become a practitioner, and a lot of people, I know priests and seminarians have done it, and other people, lawyers and teachers, besides therapists, and can really help. It's a way of relating that is overlaps beautifully with Orthodoxy. And another one is psychosynthesis. And their model is the same. You do a weekend for once a month or every 2 months, and if you Google those or if you get stuck, you let me know, but I can guide you. But those are ways that are can help us have a understanding of our psychic and at the same time integrate with spirituality and overlaps beautifully with orthodoxy. So.
I'd like to say something to that. I'd like to respond to that also. In Bruce Walpole's meta-analysis of 50 years of psychotherapy research, that means he's looking at small numbers and research and large so that you can compare them equally. The medical model explains less than 1% of the change. Theories don't matter, even though CBT and all these other ones want to say there's some result. What matters is the relationality, the capacity to form a relationship with the persons. And actually, I didn't want to say this when Philip was talking about getting better over the years, but actually the evidence suggests that you don't get any better over the years as a therapist. Really, a human being that learns to love and be genuine and is facing the pain in their life and dealing with reality and becoming a person, I think will become a good therapist. Now, you need to find, it's good to organize things, but I really don't think curriculums, when my students come to me after they've gained all their training, and then we start doing individual encounters with supervision, they say we've never done anything like this in school. They don't want to leave because they start to be able to repent, self-examine, deepen, they cry a lot, and that is their training to encounter another human being. So I think in that sense, our Orthodox faith, we lose 60% of our children from the church, in the Greek church. I don't know, we don't have research on this, but I think this is because baklava, Greek dancing, and ethnicity will not hold people. You can get that anywhere, go do it. What we have to do is find this, we have to look for this link that is everywhere between this world and the other. Thy will be done on earth, and become human beings. And then, if we get a master's degree in therapy, good. We need that. We should start to integrate that. But without the foundation that we're talking about from the Orthodoxy, all our healing professions will suffer. Even medicine, Larcher suggests that if you treat the body, you treat the disease without it being in a spiritual context, you do immeasurable harm to the person. So what we're talking about at this conference, the confluence of all three and the development and becoming of a person is the bullseye.
I just want to thank the panelists and the participants and the organizers. I just want to build up on that. I was thinking of you can't heal effectively unless you're healed yourself. And the early Christian church, of course, was the spiritual hospital and realized that. And I think I know myself I've become a more effective physician. I've been able to be there for people, create that space when I started. And it takes a lot of courage, and I appreciate everybody's or those who shared their woundedness and which starts day one at birth, and continues to have that courage to sit in the pain, to go through that suffering, to look at yourself and to know your passions and what you have to work on. It takes a lot of courage. And that's what builds resilience, and it continues to theosis, and it's an endless process. And I think it makes you that person who can sit and give that person next to you that space and share that pain and help them. But you have to go through that yourself. And these conferences have really helped me and have given me that nourishment. So thank you.
I wanted to share an observation that then turns into a question. I've noticed a developing theme, especially today in the talks I attended, but also in yesterday's, that essentially resilience is built as a result of going through struggle. And having spent the past 4 years at a liberal arts college and 4 summers as a camp counselor, I've noticed, at least in that environment, at least the college environment, struggle and discomfort are purely negative terms. They're things to be avoided. The ultimate life, according to that world, is some combination of comfort and meaning, but comfort is extremely stressed and very important. And it seems from being a counselor that in young people more and more that's the idea that they have in their heads, that struggle is a bad thing. So how, in working with Orthodox young people, can we help guide them to understand that struggle leads to growth and that it's something to be taken on and it's not going to feel good, but we'll come out better for it in the end?
Martin Buber says the master leaves a person alone, doesn't interfere with them. And in that sense, I think to respect the person's freedom, but to accompany them. There's a paradox there. To be alone together is so important, to be so deeply interested in compassionate co-traveler, but to leave the person alone. I think that conveys something of what you're asking.
Deacon. You know, in my experience, there's a lot of false trials. They're created stressors. For example, in medicine, when I was an intern, and I hate using that expression, but I'll say it again. When I was in training, there was a lot of abuse. When you were young, you worked every other night call, you did a lot of crazy things. There was a lot of yelling, there was a lot of demeaning. It's like the military somewhat, and especially back then. I'm sure, Father, you can comment on that. But these are false sufferings. They're created sufferings, and there are real sufferings. And I think abuse is a false suffering, and I think you have to distinguish them to some degree. And when you are talking to college students, well, there's some created suffering that happens, but I think in general, I don't think we need to look for it, but we need to be prepared that when it comes, we have tools to deal with it. And I think we should be outspoken about creating situations that are abusive. I think we have to be very careful about that. So I think I would distinguish that. There are real tragedies that occur in the world, and yes, if we have support from our counselors, our priests, our caregivers, those things will help us to deal with them, but we want to make sure they're authentic, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. The Chinese have a saying, those who will learn, nature leads gently, those who will not, nature drives relentlessly. And so I think it's a matter of timing. And, you'll get some teenagers who come from a lot of abuse and a lot of pain, and it's very real. And those who are in comfort, pray for them, because it's going to come sooner or later. Yeah. With so many clients, you plant a seed for the time they'll need it to ripen, and you never get to see that seed, grow to fruition or be harvested. And so the example of who you are and what you do with these kids will be an important gift to them at such time as they need it. Yeah.
First, I do want to thank everybody here, and especially all the wonderful people I've met, and I hope to continue these relationships through the years and hopefully return. I've only been Orthodox for 3 years, so I'm extremely new and struggling and just needing to learn a lot. But I think that in my work as a clinical psychologist now, it's very interesting. I do have a few icons, in my office, sort of not in anyone's face. But as Orthodox now, I'm kind of glad I didn't really seek to be a spiritual counselor while I was Protestant or when I was Roman Catholic. But as Orthodox now, I'm finding that I can sit, with people in a deeper way. And I even have, because the idea of non-judging of others and always just pointing the finger back at myself from reading some of the saints and the fathers, of course, taking it on, But, for example, I have a Mormon client who's struggling mightily because she's done some terrible things in her past, and she's just desperately afraid to go to their version of confession to her bishop, because one of the consequences in Mormonism, when you confess, is to be excommunicated at that point. No forgiveness, no absolution. So she's terrified. And she said to me one day, I feel like you're my confessor. And of course, I was like, oh my God, no. But I can at least just listen to her and provide a way for her to tell somebody what she's going through. And then I have an atheist client who hates Christians, right? She hates Christians. She was brought up in a very strict, rigid Southern Baptist family where her father would kill animals in front of her pets and things. So, it wasn't really a true Christian home and family. And she'll tell me, how she hates God and she hates Christians, but she'll sit and, look at me, and she sees my cross. And at one point, the encounter you talked about, it gets so deep. And I said, but you don't hate me.
Yeah.
She doesn't. She loves me. I love her. Thank you so much.
In my very first unit of clinical pastoral education, CPE, which is required, to become a board-certified chaplain, I was in a Presbyterian hospital, and I was with a Salvation Army lieutenant. She was in for a kidney transplant, and I went in to do a pre-op visit with her. That Salvation Army lieutenant, who I see her face and I don't know her name, she is the one who ordained me. I had nobody else to ordain me. And in those days, there wasn't even blessing of hands for people who were in helping ministries. But her words and her presence and her ability to receive my care and love, such as I was able to give at that time, she gave back to me. It was such a blessing. And I remember doing that verbatim. And they asked me, so what was the outcome of this? And it was my ordination in the Holy Spirit. And so you never know. You might be the only person that someone turns to in their time of need. And at least go somewhere and learn some basic listening skills. Because as Orthodox Christians, we are ministers to one another in the name of Christ. And be prepared for that. That's part of your responsibility as an Orthodox Christian, I think.
Oh, I'm really short. I never realized how short I am until your comment kind of struck a chord with me. I'm kind of wondering.
You're the perfect height.
I'm really short.
No, you're not.
I'm just.
The microphones
I'm really,
are tall.
Not anymore.
There we go. This is better. Wait, now I'm too. Okay.
Good girl.
This is difficult.
There you go.
I was too tall finally for once. What do you kind of do, or how do you react when someone tells you that they feel like you're like their confessor or their parent, where they kind of put you in this position of their kind of like only hope or only healer, which I'm assuming we don't want, because that can be very unhealthy. But kind of how do you react? How do you cope with that? And then what do you do to kind of reinforce their self-identity and stability within themselves and not kind of having them project that on you?
Or they say, you're like my priest. I would add that to that.
Yeah.
Right? They get people who will say something like that.
Well, it's awkward. I actually had this guy from Greece come up to me in church. I mean, I'm a deacon in the church, and he, a very thick accent, "Doctor, you're my only hope for my brother who's dying in Greece." And I kind of looked at him and I said, and he was crying and upset, and he had all these papers and medical stuff, and I said, well, let me look at him, but if I'm his only hope, he's in trouble.
Yeah,
I told him that. I said,
good luck with that.
Christ is our only hope for all of us. I said, no matter what the circumstances are, I might be able to help you, I might not. Your brother might do well, he might not. You might be able to help your brother, you might not. It might be a stranger that helps your brother, but Christ is our only helper. So I want to get that straight before I even look at these papers and all these CAT scans you just brought to me. So I looked at them. I tried to call the doctor in Greece. My Greek is terrible. I got some lady that got mad at me, and then I was trying to find out the information. I went back and forth. This took months. In the meantime, every time he sees me, you're my only hope. And I'm like getting all this pressure, and then I'm trying to get a Greek guy that can read it better than me, and all this stuff. So anyway, as it turns out, he has sounds like an autoimmune disease, and he's wasting away, and then they move him to another hospital. This whole story went peeled out. About a week ago, this started in June. So about a week ago, he goes, "Doctor, my brother's getting better." I said, "Well, it looks like Christ did the job because the rest of us sure didn't." He laughed, he hugged me, and that was it. But I think you just try to be honest with people. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Too much. I think for a priest, too. Sometimes people put too much on the priest. You're my only hope. You're my confessor. It's, you just have to be honest and say, I'm just an instrument. I'm doing the best I can. I'm a spoon. I'm a fork. I'm a pair of pliers. I'll do the best I can to help, but if God uses me, good.
It varies with each person.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's helpful to say, well, who brought you here? Somebody brought you into this office or into this church.
I like that.
And that part of you, that which I think is soul, but I don't lay that on them, has helped you in the past. Can you remember another time that was as bad as this? And how were you helped in the past? And how did you access that help yourself? So trying to kind of reframe it back to them about, okay, I'm your only help in this way that I can mirror to you. Let's look at how you have helped yourself and where did that come from? And sometimes in a pluralistic setting, sometimes it's Christ, oftentimes it is. Other times it's just they'll rely on their past experience and say, oh yeah, I guess I did that. Or, well, I'm a member of a church and they all prayed for me and they brought me food and it got me through. Okay, so how could we replicate that? So trying to move into how they have solved it themselves, and if they have a past experience of having solved it themselves, to reconnect them to that past experience. Yeah.
Add another little piece to that. It occurs to me. Pointing to Christ is in some way gently and through just practicalness is definitely true. But it occurs to me that there are different kinds of dependencies. So you don't want guruism and that sort of thing, which feeds it's a function of the narcissism and vainglory of the therapist or the priest. But you want to be tender, I think, and caring and not shaming someone for the emergence of their love for you, even romantic feelings. They could have sexual feelings, long-term therapy. There have been clients that fall and think they're in love. It's usually very easy to deal with that. It's a kind of a very vulnerable place to start to speak about that when the person brings it up and they don't know. Sometimes they quit therapy at that point. But then they realize, it's not you that they're in love with. They have responded in a normal and a good way to the tenderness of being listened to. And this is a corrective for so much abuse sometimes, that it's a very important but sometimes perilous place in therapy, because at the same time that there's an unlocking of the natural feelings and desire of a human capacity, there's also, if there was abuse, the undercurrent of the expectation of a violation at the very place where this is happening. Yeah. So this takes some understanding about, in order to deal with that, and this is one area that, like in confession with clergy who are not aware of trauma or haven't really done a, let's say, clinical intake on their confessee, and they start inviting a great deal of disclosure. A person who may not not have had therapy, they begin to do this, and they can develop a traumatic attachment and transference, as well as one that splits and sees this person now as an abuser. And so these are complicated issues that require a lot more to talk about and supervision and things, but they're definitely an area worth discussing in terms of the crossover between confession and therapy.
I would add one thing, and that is,
It's too tall.
I think the problem is not when a client says that. The problem is when the therapist starts to believe it.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and because it's, like you said, it's kind of a normal process. I think it's akin to my 4-year-old saying, you are a perfect dad.
Yeah.
You know, and you're the best dad in the world. And if I start believing he's right, if I don't recognize what that's coming from and see it for what it is, and then we stay within our lane and you stay within our boundaries, I think it becomes, I always make a mental note that, okay, it looks like we have a path to go on and there's going to be a process. But we can expect that, and just it's for us not to get confused.
I wanted to ask a question that I think draws on a theme that I heard kind of through all of you. And Father John, it sort of starts with Irenaeus and the idea of being immature, being not developed, not fully developed. And it seems like that goes through every single one of your talks and thoughts. And I wonder if you could talk about how that movement from humanity as being undeveloped to a fully, eventually dead and immortalized alternate creation in a way comes about. Could you maybe talk about those themes? Maybe I asked for a tall order.
Let me use this one.
All right, I'm supposed to start while he thinks here. Okay. So I'll just say one thing. I think of DNA and natural processes that sort of keep operating whether you want them or not. But the development of the personhood is a special kind of synergy with the created life and the true person. And to me, that's an infinite journey. It never stops. The dialogue of love continues forever with an infinite God. It begins here as soon as there's conception, and it never really ends.
Is he done thinking?
You thought it all out now? Here, I'll put that down so it doesn't.
I think retrospection. I think retrospection is a really, really fascinating phenomenon. Retrospection. Yeah? Kierkegaard put it this way: we only ever understand backwards, but we must live forwards. Okay, and you have to have both sides of that. You know, I mentioned kind of in passing in my talk this morning. How long do I have?
As long as you want.
Okay. I mentioned in passing my talk this morning that we don't start with Adam and then move to Christ. We actually start with Christ and go back to Adam and understand the whole thing anew. Yeah? It's only in the light of Christ that we actually begin to realize death is a problem. You know, they weren't waiting for someone to save them from death beforehand, but rather now that we've got the Paschal event, Christ opens the book, and now Paul can say, Adam sinned, death came into the world, Christ's righteous life came into the world. So now we can see death as a problem, but death is simultaneously the means of victory. Okay? That's only because we think retrospectively, but we must live forwardly. So it's sometimes said, you talk about personhood, that personhood, what we consider today to be personhood, my identity as a person, is actually my past told from my present. Yeah? It's actually my past. The way I think about my identity is my past told from my present. And that's an always changing phenomenon. The way I think about my past now is radically different to the way I think about my past when I was 25 years old. Yeah? My past has literally changed. Yeah? The past is not static, it changes. You know, during my teenage years, I was pretty wild. I dropped out of church, I dropped out of school, I was doing drugs, I was doing all sorts of things like that. You could not have told me at that point that God was leading me to him to be professor and priest at St. Vladimir Seminary. Yeah? And if you had had a really spiritual, discerning person, and I knew Archimandrite Sophronia, I knew Metropolitan Anthony, I knew some really spiritual people, even if they were able to see that, it would be wrong to tell me. I would say, great, let's go get drunk some more. It doesn't work like that. But now looking backwards, I can see how in my worst sinfulness and apostasy, God was actually at work to lead me to him. It goes back to dynamic Paul already says, where sin is, grace abounds. It doesn't mean go sin some more. Yeah? So in fact, our goal is to keep on striving forward, and through that striving forward, allow the light to shine into our past so that all becomes illuminated. So what we think of as being our identity is in fact our past told from the perspective of the present. Okay? But what we've got in Christ, actually in the cross, the passion, crucifixion, resurrection, is a new but eternal vantage point from which to see all of this.
That's nice.
Yeah? In which we see it ever anew as we strive towards it, and will continue to strive towards it as we move on towards our death. I completely forgotten what the question was. Okay.
Tell us what you really think.
So as we're striving towards that, our past continues to change, and we continue to grow into that. I heard somebody talk earlier about the church as a spiritual hospital. I'm not so sure. I'm really not sure. I'm really, really hesitant about that expression. I don't think I've ever found it in any church father, at least not from the early centuries. Yeah? I think it's something which comes into Christianity through monasticism and so on, and then becomes really kind of a mode of speaking about that. And it's really telling that we only start to talk in modern popular Orthodox theology, we only start to talk about the church as a spiritual hospital, my guess is from the middle of the 20th century. If you were to look back at 19th century works, Solovyov, Komyakov, people like that, they don't talk that way. So isn't it fascinating that we start to adopt that language just at the point in time when everybody in Western culture goes to therapy? Yeah, there's something going on in that. So I'm kind of hesitant about that. Okay? No doubt we need therapy. No doubt we need to grow. No doubt we need to recover from whatever it might be. I'm not correcting that at all. I'm not criticizing that at all. But that's not the end point. The end point actually is martyrdom. The church is always a church of martyrs, ones who take up the cross and die following Christ. Yeah? So the goal of that growth is martyrdom, not integration. Yeah? I mean, yes, integration in the sense of when we finally die in witness to Christ, whether it's through breathing our last and saying, into thy hands I commend my spirit, or whether it is through actual martyrdom that we think is a thing of the past, but it's happening all around the world. That point of death provides integration. Yeah? That's when our story is sealed. Is it going to be sealed in a Christ-like way or not? Yeah? That's the growth we're aiming towards. And that's the growth all growth should aim towards. Now, that needs to be appropriate as according to age and so on. When you're dealing with a toddler, a teenager, an adult, when you're dealing with adults with some kind of problems, there's other kind of problems, you've got to have all of that. But that's not the end. You've got to have all the therapy, the working with them to get over whatever problems they're dealing with, struggling with, all the wounds they're dealing with. But recovery from that is not the end point. Martyrdom is.
Father, it's interesting because I was just thinking about, we did not all talk to each other about what we were going to talk about, and we all mentioned death quite a bit in our discussion on resilience. So I think we need to change it to the church as a mortuary.
Absolutely. If you were to look at the ancient world, the church would have been seen as a funeral club.
Exactly.
And in fact, to be very blunt, when emigres started to come over to the New World, what did they do first of all? They built a church and a funeral club.
Of course.
Because that's what we're dealing with in this. You come to church to die.
So you can live.
So you can live.
I want to ask you, Father John, what type of growth do you think there is after death and resurrection in the eternal literature?
Very, very simple. Very simple. And I think the only way to think about it, one of the best ways to think about it, is to use the image which Origen first introduces and then gets picked up and used by all the fathers. And that's the image of iron in fire. Yeah. So if you've got a piece of iron, an iron knife, you can identify it by certain properties. It's cold, it's hard, it's cut. Yeah. You know the properties by which you identify an iron knife. You put it in the fire, and it remains the very same matter it is. You know, it's exactly the same matter it is, but it loses all its properties. Yeah. It becomes only known by the properties of fire. Yeah? Take it out of the fire, it loses its properties and gradually becomes cold again. Yeah? But in the fire, it never actually becomes in itself fire. So it kind of gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, an infinite getting hotter. Yeah? No, not just yet. So it never actually becomes identified with the fire, but we can only now know in terms of fire. So that God is a consuming fire. The end of our life is to enter into Him as a consuming fire, and then continuing to grow in that way. Now there are many, many more things one can say about that, because if God is a consuming fire, the end of our life is to die and rise in Christ, in God, in His consuming fire. Well, the properties of a consuming fire are to be beyond space and time. Yeah. And that's where it becomes really, really fascinating. It becomes beyond space and time. So we think of our death and resurrection as entering into God at a certain moment and being there thereafter. Yeah? But there is no before or after in the eternity of God. So we actually have to think, although I'm not there yet, and although I was not before I was born in this world, I always have already been there with Him.
Three-pointed answer.
He called us into being before the foundation of the world.
That's one.
All right, I think I'm with you. Here's to push back. Father Sophroni has spoken about not simply becoming a drop in the ocean of the impersonal absolute, but the hypostasis of God and the movement of the Trinity. So that each person having this non-space and time encounter that does become red hot, as you say, eternally, because one can never, the essence of God is always beyond us in that sense. So while I have no problem at all, I like the theological analogy. It is, and it may have to be an abstraction, because there is a life in that, just like there's a human life. You are a unique human life, and everyone in here is. And so we can make an abstraction about what that is, but my wife matters to me because she's Claudia. Yeah. And in eternity, if there is not Claudia and God red hot, then I don't have much interest.
But one can absolutely do that, remembering all of these things are analogies and it must be taken as such. I'm really, really hesitant about talking about perichoresis and inner dance of Trinity and things like that. That really is late 20th century pop theology. Okay? But let's not go there. The point I want to make is that just like the iron entering into the fire doesn't change, but it's now embodied. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's actually embodied in each iron knife that goes in the fire in the particular way appropriate to that iron knife. It remains the matter it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt about it. Absolutely remains matter it is, but it's no longer known. We decrease. I no longer live. Christ lives in us. It's exactly that kind of movement, and one can actually extend that a bit further and talk about. Paul says, "In Christ is neither male nor female." You put a bronze knife in the fire, you put an iron knife in the fire, they become indistinguishable. They remain bronze and iron, but they become indistinguishable, yeah? But they still remain what they are, there's no doubt about it. So in fact, one could go further and just simply kind of movement within the Trinity and so on. The fire now becomes embodied in each and every one. And that's meant by incarnation.
Well, I don't know there's much more to say to that, except that poetry and melody in some way. In fact, there's a quotation from, I think it's Nephon. It was translation from Romanian. It's the last quotation in my book, Treasure in Earthen Vessels. But his vision is of an eternal melody that never is the same, and all five senses are illuminated there. It's a very beautiful passage, and that kind of puts some meat on the bones said, I want to say, yes, those are the bones. Now I want to go further than what can we say, until we die. Okay.
At this point, I want to thank the panelists for your weekend contributions, your speech, your preparation, your being with us for the weekend, and I want to thank everyone for gathering us this weekend. It's a gift and a blessing to be together. We look forward to seeing everyone and one or two friends next year. Thank you so much. And we will be meeting. We have Vespers at the church down the way over the bridge at 5:30. Please give a warm round. What's that? Kavanaugh's afterward. All right. Thank you very much.